RPN is not responsible for the views, actions, opinions, or statements of its guests or advertisers. The information on this program is not to be construed as medical or legal advice. An appearance on the show is not to be considered an endorsement. As always, we encourage you to do your own research. Enjoy the show. Good evening, everyone. You're listening to Red Pill 78. I am the Corruption Detector, and this is your Red Pill News for Saturday Night Livestream. Joining me once again, Dr. Michael Salla. We're going to be talking about the secret space program tonight. Maybe secret space programs. I don't even know. All I know is that something is going on, and they're not telling us the truth. So we're going to get to the bottom of it. Get your questions ready. In the second hour, you'll be able to ask Dr. Salla those questions once again. Do me a favor, everyone, please don't forget to like and share this broadcast. Help us break through the algorithm. If you want to support the channel, there are ways that you can do that in the description below. I'm going to ask the mods to help me out tonight with questions that the audience has for the good doctor. And thank you for keeping the chat comfy. All right, gang. Please, everyone, do sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, and we'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor. It is so important to keep your body healthy and youthful all the time these days. Collagen may be the closest thing we'll ever get to a real fountain of youth, while also forming a wall of defense between your immune system and the rest of your body. 75 to 90% of your skin, bones, joints, and tendons are all made of this age-defying nutrient. The older you are, the more likely it's caught your attention, and that's for good reason. Many health experts now agree that consuming collagen is as crucial as it gets to renew and revitalize how you look and feel. After all, collagen is the most abundant protein in your body, and essentially it's the glue that holds yourself together. And after age 20, people produce about 12% less collagen in their skin each decade. For some, it's an even greater decline. Now, what this means is that by the time you're middle-aged, you could be producing less than half the collagen you did in your youth. And even worse, various lifestyle factors you might have been exposed to, like poor diet, smoking, pollution, stress, and even excess sun exposure, can deplete your collagen levels even faster. Some of the benefits of using collagen are making your skin healthy and supple and giving you a youthful look, making your hair healthy and younger looking, supporting your joint flexibility, strengthening your nails, teeth, and gums, promoting strong, healthy muscles, tendons, and ligaments, and promoting strong, healthy bones and digestive health. So visit my page at healthwithredpill.com. That's healthwithredpill.com, and secure your supply of the best collagen on the market. I use it myself, and I trust it. The link is in the description, and remember, when you support my sponsors, you support this channel. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for sticking around, and please join me in welcoming to the program, once again, Dr. Michael Salla. Dr. Salla, how are you this evening?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for coming back. So tonight we're going to be talking about the secret space program. I think secret space program, and I have a definition for that, but I think it's very possible that many people might have their own idea of what that means. What, to you, Dr. Salla, does the secret space program mean? What does it represent?
Basically, what it means is that back in the 1940s, the US military got in its hands some crashed flying saucer vehicles and began research and development programs dating from the earliest crash that we know most about, which was the Los Angeles air raid incident, when apparently there were two flying saucer craft that were retrieved after the artillery bombardment over Los Angeles. And it was placed in the hands of the Army. And the Army had primary responsibility, but the Navy also had its hands in one of the craft. And so that after you had the creation of the Air Force, you actually had the Air Force pursuing one line of development and the Navy pursuing another line of development. And that was in the 1940s. So during World War II, not only was there a kind of conventional war being fought between the Allied and the Axis powers, but there was also this covert war in terms of research and development where the Allies were trying to find out what the Germans were building. And we know a lot about this because there was an aerospace engineer by the name of William Tompkins, who actually was part of a Navy espionage program out of Naval Air Station San Diego, where he says almost 30 Navy spies were embedded within different aerospace companies in Germany and reporting back to the United States about what the Germans were building, what their top aerospace projects were, and people know about the V1, V2 rockets. They know about the Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter and the jet bomber. What they don't know about is that the Nazis were working, and according to William Tompkins, he said that the Nazis had developed 30 prototype flying saucer craft using all kinds of different propulsions and different configurations. Some would be fighters, some would be kind of like used for transportation, others kind of like space exploration. So this is during the war. So he says that these Navy spies were coming in on a 6-month rotation and giving debriefings to the Navy, and that William Tompkins said his job was to hear those debriefings and to then make sense of it all sufficiently so that he could put together a briefing packet that he would then take to different aerospace companies, to different think tanks, to different government agencies, anyone that showed any interest in these kinds of advanced supersonic craft, and to see if anyone was willing to pursue it any further or had any know-how on it. And so based on that, we get we can trace back the lines of development for the secret space programs today that are possessed by the US Air Force and the US Navy back to those very early times during the Second World War, when both the Navy and the Army Air Force got their hands on these advanced flying saucer prototypes and were also running spies in Nazi Germany to bring back any information they had about what the Nazi aerospace programs were doing.
That is fascinating. So if they were doing this work during the Second World War, would the German craft have been what the Foo Fighters were when American troops came back and they said that they saw the glowing balls flying around their planes when they were flying over doing bombing runs?
That was one of the kind of super weapons that the Germans were working on. I mean, they had companies and experts who specialized in high voltage electrostatics and being able to manipulate electromagnetics to produce all kinds of different phenomena. And so one of the weapons that they were trying to develop were these kind of electromagnetic plasma balls, if you like, that could be specifically targeted to interfere with the avionics of the jet fighters and the bombers that the United States was sending over Germany during the latter parts of the war. But the Germans, even though they were way ahead of the United States in terms of aerospace know-how and skills, they made a lot of bad choices. Hitler, for example, kind of like made a lot of bad choices in terms of what kind of technologies to prioritize. So by the end of the war, they were truly scrambling, hoping to be able to weaponize these advanced technologies, but they simply ran out of time. But nevertheless, we know that like the Messerschmitt 262 jet bomber, if they had the jet fighter, if they had come out with that earlier in the war, it would have been able to shoot down all of the American bombers and the kind of like fighter escorts that they had. So the Germans really made bad choices, and that was on Hitler. But the thing was that as far as these advanced electromagnetically propelled flying saucer craft was concerned, I mean, these were like incredibly difficult. The Germans tried to weaponize them, but you cannot combine very easily, if at all, Newtonian physics with this kind of like torsion field physics. Where you have like a spinning craft, where you have a plasma spinning around the craft very, very rapidly. We're talking at least 60,000 revolutions per minute. So they were getting plasma to spin around these flying saucers to generate the anti-gravity effect and the space-time kind of like anomalies that they needed to be able to fly. And to try and combine that with a kind of conventional cannon, which has a kind of like Newtonian application where you have a force, for every force there's an equal and opposite. So you couldn't just attach a cannon to a flying saucer craft that was generating these enormous torsion field physics. Later on, they were able to weaponize these craft using laser weapons. But during the war, they were trying to weaponize them using conventional cannons, and so they failed. So they ran out of time. But nevertheless, the Allied powers were getting a lot of this information back, so that when the war ended, both the Air Force and the Navy would develop their own separate development programs for reverse engineering these advanced flying saucer craft that were revolutionary, because some of the craft that the Germans had built, like the Hannibal series of craft, that could fly around 24,000 miles per hour, which was like just unbelievable to the Allied powers at the time. But nevertheless, this is what they had achieved, and there are FBI documents actually corroborating that the Germans were able to flight test some of these flying saucers that could travel at many thousands of miles per hour. But according to some leaked documents that supposedly Nazi SS files, we know that there were at least 4 models, the real craft, the Hannibal 1, the Hannibal 2, and Hannibal 3, that had been put into production, and each one could accommodate a certain number of personnel and could achieve a certain top speed. But the Hannibal 3, that was the one that could achieve a top speed of 40,000 miles an hour, which means that it could escape the Earth's velocity. So this was during the Second World War. And that's kind of like really incredible to think of. But nevertheless, this was the kind of help the Germans were getting during the war. And they were being helped by an extraterrestrial group, according to multiple sources.
Would that be sources just coming out of Germany? Or are you talking about the Navy men that were embedded in the German research centers?
Yeah, the Navy men, they basically reported back that they saw, they described them as reptilian-looking beings working with German scientists on these flying saucer programs. And so, according to William Tompkins, who elaborated on this, he said that the reptilians had struck up an agreement with Hitler's Nazi Germany and were basically providing them with whatever kind of like blueprints they needed, whatever kind of flying saucer craft that they needed to be able to duplicate these and reverse engineer their own craft. And this was happening throughout the world, throughout the Second World War, and that as time was running out, the Germans realized that they weren't going to be able to finish their most advanced flying saucer projects. So they took their completed saucer projects and they took them to South America and Antarctica, using these large submarine fleets that they had built, and left behind in Germany the unsuccessful prototypes, because the Germans followed the same kind of model that's followed in the United States, whereby you put out tenders to different corporations and say, I want a flying saucer built that can perform these kind of specifications, and this is the research. And so different companies compete, and some companies get further than others in terms of coming up with a functional model. So we know in Nazi Germany, the successful company was Dornier. That was a aerospace company in Germany, and so it was Dornier that actually built the Hannibal series of craft. And so that meant that the other companies that had built craft that were unsuccessful, that had all sorts of problems, and these were ones that were reported in 1950 by people like Giuseppe Belluzza, the Italian engineer, and also Schreiber from Germany, that they were talking on unsuccessful prototypes. So that's what the Allies got after the war, both the US and the Russians. They got their hands on the unsuccessful prototypes that the Germans had built, but even, nevertheless, the Allies thought that this was quite an intelligence coup to get these things. But nevertheless, they were the ones that were unsuccessful for various reasons, and the ones that were taken down to Antarctica were later weaponized to deal with the United States when it actually sent Operation High Jump to Antarctica.
And what evidence do we have to point to them having these successful craft? Is it only the first-hand witness accounts of these men coming out of Germany, or is this included in the FBI documents that you pointed to?
Well, we know that the FBI documents, there are a number of witnesses who say that they were part of these programs in developing flying saucers, and some of them reported that the tests were successful, and that the saucers were able to achieve flight speeds of several thousand kilometers per hour. Mm-hmm. So that's in the FBI documents, and so you have those reports, and then you have William Tompkins' reports about what he says he was briefed about by these Navy spies, that there had been successful prototypes that had been built and were sent down to Antarctica. In 1991, there was a new development, which was there was a researcher by the name of Vladimir Trzynski, who was a Bulgarian engineer who had been with the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. And he says that as the Cold War ended, a lot of the KGB files on Nazi Germany were basically released, sold to the highest bidder. Any former KGB agent, if they wanted to make a bit of money, they would take one of these files and they would sell it to the highest bidder. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how it happened. So, according to Trzynski, some of the files that were released that he got possession of actually concerned the successful Hannibal series of craft that had been taken down to Antarctica. So Trzynski's lectures, you can still actually find them on the internet today. They have the blueprints, they have the kind of requisitions in terms of how many craft were built. Like, we know there were 4 craft that were described by Trzynski: the Hannibal 1, Hannibal 2, and Hannibal 3. So that was from Trzynski. Now there are other whistleblowers that have also come forward and talked about seeing these flying saucers that had been recovered from Nazi Germany at the S4 facility at Area 51. One of them, his name, this was a witness that Linda Moulton Howe first came across in the late 90s. And basically he says that he was an army cryptologist recruited by the CIA to kind of monitor UFO activity in South America, because the American military were very concerned in terms of being able to identify which flying saucers belonged to the Nazis in Antarctica and which flying saucers were extraterrestrial in origin. So that was his job, and he says basically, it's quite an interesting story, but he says that he was taken to Area 51, he was taken to the S4 facility, and he says that at the S4 facility, he says that he saw 7 flying saucer craft. This was back in 1958. Area 51 was only built in 55. So in that 3 years, they had taken all of the craft that had been earlier stored at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to Area 51 to S4. He says he saw 7 craft. He says of those 7 craft, 4 of them were Nazi craft, and 3 of them were extraterrestrial craft. And of those 4 Nazi craft, he said one of them was of real craft, and he said the other 3 were larger flying saucer craft. And he said one of them was very big. So I think he was talking about the Hannibal 3 that they got. So, we do have multiple whistleblowers basically telling us very similar things, that the Germans had developed successful prototypes of flying saucer craft, and they had flown them down to Antarctica, and the Americans got their hands on some of these prototypes and taking them down to S4 for study and reverse engineering.
When we brought over all of those Nazi scientists as a part of Project Paperclip, did they then integrate their knowledge of these crafts that they had built into our space program here?
The Nazi paperclip scientists are really important because there was an agreement that was reached in the 1950s whereby the Eisenhower administration reached an agreement with the Germans in Antarctica whereby if the Germans shared their scientific know-how in terms of how to reverse engineer these extraterrestrial craft, then the United States would allow resources, manpower, and any equipment that the Nazis needed in Antarctica. So they would partner with the Nazis in Antarctica in their colonization program, space colonization. So there was a collaboration happening there between the Nazis and the Eisenhower administration during the Second World War. Now, the Operation Paperclip scientists, they were like the mechanism by which this agreement was put into operation. So they would share their expertise that they had. They would basically, a lot of them were double agents. I mean, it's really important to emphasize that these guys were double agents, many of them.
So they came here, but they never stopped working for Germany, basically?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They didn't stop working for they simply stopped working for the Third Reich and began working for the Fourth Reich. And we know that. We know that. We know that Clark McClellan was a spacecraft operator, and he says that he saw a lot of these Nazis, former Nazis, going to the Kennedy Space Center, and one of the Nazis he saw was Hans Kammler, and that Hans Kammler was there at the Kennedy Space Center, and he said that all of the Operation Paperclip scientists were terrified of Kammler and the Nazi International, the SS. So they knew that they were expected to be loyal to the mother country rather than to be loyal to the United States. So those many of them were just straight out, you never stop being Nazis. Others that maybe did have second doubt, had second thoughts about working for the Nazis, they were intimidated into working for the Germans out of Antarctica. And we know that from the testimony of people like Clark McClellan. So, there are many other stories of Operation Paperclip scientists that were playing this role of working for the Fourth Reich and trying to basically, on the one hand, appear to be helping the US space programs move forward, but really trying to direct the US down dead ends. Like, for example, Werner von Braun, Kurt de Boos were saying, well, you really should put all your resources into rocket propulsion technologies. This is how we're going to achieve space travel and so forth. When they knew very well, as did many other Operation Paperclip scientists, that rocket propulsion, maybe as a weapon, it's good for a rocket if you want to send a ballistic missile to target someone, but for space exploration, it's a joke. It's a sheer joke.
Right.
If you want to explore space, you need to be able to utilize principles of electromagnetic propulsion, torsion field physics. You have to be able to bend space-time to be able to travel not just throughout our solar system in a reasonable amount of time, but if you want to travel to distant solar systems, you can't do it any other way than to be able to use these torsion field physics principles to basically manipulate space-time so that you could travel to distant solar systems very, very quickly and come back, within a lifetime.
Dr. Salla, I've often thought that when it came down to it, the Germans, the Nazis, essentially, they won World War II because the top of the heap, okay, all the hardest brass, the people that were given the orders, ended up being able to come here to America. They got set up with new identities. They got set up with cushy lives and government jobs. And then we've ended up where we are today. I mean, we had the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Clearly, all of the technology that we've been working on has been leading. I mean, we've essentially not moved forward as a country. All the technologies that we're using are, decades old. And we're no farther along in terms of space exploration. We've had to start farming it out to private industries. Were there any types of checks or balances in place when these Project Paperclip Germans came over to America? I mean, were we naive enough to think that just because we weren't going to put them to death for the war, that they were just going to come over here and everyone was going to be okay and they'd immediately start working for us?
There was something that was done, and it's actually quite creative. What happened was that a decision was made, and I believe it was basically some senior Navy admirals that made the decision that they would actually work with one group of extraterrestrials, which was kind of like a human-looking Nordic group of extraterrestrials, and work with them in developing a space program, while the US Air Force would work with the Germans and with the reptilians out of Antarctica and try and develop a space program, a separate space program, and to see how far they got doing it that way. So there were basically two simultaneous space programs that were being developed throughout the 1950s in the United States, one run by the Navy, one run by the Air Force. And according to William Tompkins, he basically was part of the Navy effort that used a company, major aerospace companies. The one that he was involved with was Douglas Aircraft Company. And at Douglas, he says that basically there were these human-looking extraterrestrials that had infiltrated Douglas, and their job was to help the Douglas engineers and scientists develop the insights and come up with the proper designs for developing future space carriers. And he says that that's what was going on, that the Navy, using companies like Douglas Aircraft Company in the 1950s and 60s, was getting designs with the assistance of these human-looking extraterrestrials of how to build a very large, a kilometre-long space carrier. And that in the 60s and the 70s, those designs were then finalised, and they were given to architects and engineers for production. And that's when in the 1970s, you had the first prototypes emerging, and these were very large space carriers. And, and this is William Tompkins' story, and what gives his story special emphasis or a lot of credibility is the fact that the guy that was running it at Douglas Aircraft Company was a guy by the name of Dr. Wolfgang Klemperer. Now, the thing about Dr. Wolfgang Klemperer was that he was the guy that was sent to the United States to help them build their very large cigar-shaped airships. And in 1933, you actually had the launch of the USS Akron and the USS Macon. So these were two cigar-shaped helium-filled air balloons, but they had rigid hulls. And the unique thing about them was that they actually could have aircraft land and take off from them. Ooh. So you actually had, in the 1930s, early 1930s, you had the Navy had built flying aircraft carriers that were put into service in the early 1930s. And the guy that designed these carriers had come from the Zeppelin Corporation in Germany, and that was Dr. Klemperer. So what happened was that Dr. Klemperer then went over to Douglas Aircraft Company in 1936, and so then after the war, this gives us a really good timeline for understanding how the Navy would have worked with Douglas Aircraft Company for building very large cigar-shaped space carriers, because the same designer who had built the flying aircraft carriers for the Navy, beginning in the 1920s and into the 1930s, was now at Douglas, and that was Dr. Wolfgang Klemperer. And Dr. Klemperer was the direct superior of William Tompkins. So, that gives us actually a very plausible timeline and helps corroborate, Tompkins' incredible testimony about Douglas actually coming up with the engineering designs for these kilometer-long space carriers.
So when we think about what the secret space program is today, did that come out of our participation with the breakaway Nazis down in the Antarctic, or did that come as a result of our own work with some type of off-world race of beings through the Air Force or through the Navy?
It was actually both. I mean, as I understand it, basically the Navy understood, or the Navy was given the responsibility to develop a secret space program working with these human-looking extraterrestrials. But at the same time, the Navy would spy on what the Air Force was doing and what the CIA was doing.
Really? They wouldn't share information?
Definitely not.
Wow.
Definitely not. The Navy was not at all sharing information with the CIA or with the Air Force, because the Navy knew that both had been thoroughly infiltrated by the Fourth Reich.
Okay.
But the Navy was very good at security, and the Navy was working with these human-looking extraterrestrials, and they would be able to spy any infiltrate. They would be able to identify any infiltrators. So the Navy program was well insulated and protected, and nevertheless, they were able to move forward and develop a space program. At the same time, the Navy had spies embedded within the Air Force, within NASA, within the CIA, to basically monitor what the Air Force was doing with the Germans in Antarctica, and with the reptilians and these grey extraterrestrials that were always found at various Air Force facilities. So this way, basically, you had a division of labour, and the goal was to see whether or not, in working with the Germans and working with their reptilian and grey extraterrestrial allies, the Air Force could develop a powerful space program. But unknown to the Air Force, the Navy at the same time was developing their own space program, working with these human-looking extraterrestrials. And so even up until recently, a lot of Air Force people had absolutely no idea that the Navy had a space program. They thought that they were the only show in town.
So I remember about a year ago, I reported on it when it happened, but the Navy released patents for what looked to me to be the TR-3B, a delta-shaped craft with some type of warp gravity drive. I mean, it explained it. It was exactly what you would think about if you're, going to need interstellar travel. Would that have been the final product of the Navy's space program? And if, and beyond that, I want to know as much about the Navy's public space program as possible.
Sure. Well, those patents that were released by Salvador Pais, those patents deal with technologies that the Navy had built back in the 1970s. So we're talking technologies that are 40 years old that are now being released through the patents system, because the Navy has developed even more powerful technologies today. But nevertheless, those technologies are incredible by today's standards. For example, one of those technologies is nuclear fusion reactor, and it has a power supply or a power. So it's a portable nuclear fusion reactor. So you could have one as big as a soccer ball, or as small as a soccer ball, or one that's kind of much larger. It's quite, that they can be scaled up, but essentially they're portable. And the most powerful of these portable nuclear fusion reactors, according to the Payes patent, is 1 terawatt of energy. That can produce 1 terawatt. Now, the world's most powerful nuclear reactor complex exists in Japan, and that produces 8 gigawatts. So this portable nuclear fusion reactor is like over 100 times more powerful than the most powerful nuclear fusion or nuclear fission reactor complex on the planet today. So this actually gives us an answer to one of the things that William Tompkins explained, which I think is an important part of understanding why the Navy was chosen to be the kind of primary, or to be the leader in developing a space program. Because the one big advantage that the Navy had over the Air Force is that the Navy developed submarines. And when you look at a submarine, you look at the training of the personnel, you look at the equipment. I mean, being able to develop a cylinder-shaped craft that can go under the ocean to withstand the different pressures of the ocean, double hull or triple hull. I mean, that's very similar technology to how you would actually develop a similar shaped craft going into outer space. And in fact, the Germans had done very much the same. So the Navy followed the German routine, which was basically you retrofit a submarine. And according to William Tompkins, what the US did, what the Navy did, was that it took the USS Nautilus class submarines, which were the very first nuclear attack submarines developed by the United States in the 1950s, and retrofitted them. It took out the fission reactor. It replaced it with something like this nuclear fusion reactor, and then you put in the anti-gravity propulsion systems that are also described in the patents that Payes released. Like one of these patents was generating gravity waves. Another patent was to generate a quantum vacuum around you, so that way you could actually propel the craft forward. But you would need an enormous power supply to do that. But now, with the Payes patent, we know what that power supply was. It was a nuclear fusion reactor that could produce up to 1 terawatt of energy or more. And this was what was being actually put into these submarines back in the 1970s and powering them up. So those patents that Payes released give us a lot of insight into exactly how the Navy was able to generate the power supply, how it was able to store that power, because the patents also talk about room temperature superconductors, something that is still kind of like the holy grail in terms of superconductor research, that you can actually have superconductors at room temperature being able to hold gigawatts of power. So these patents talk about that. They talk about the propulsion system, generating gravity waves, the quantum vacuum, and also talk about being able to generate a shield, a Tesla shield. One of the Payes patents was for a high frequency electromagnetic field generator, which essentially is a Tesla shield. It would reflect or protect the craft from any kind of object, and even from intense bursts of energy. We're talking about solar waves or plasma. We're talking about meteorites or anything. It would be deflected from the craft. So if you have a kilometer-long craft that you deploy into space, now we know there's a lot of space junk out there. We know there's a lot of plasma flying out there. We know there's a lot of kind of micrometeorites, these things would just pulverize anything that didn't have a electromagnetic field being generated around that. So the patents, when you look at all of the 5 patents that have been released so far, they basically spell out not only what would be the power and the propulsion systems, and how it would also explain how you store energy and how you protect the craft, and that could be used for all these flying triangles or for these much bigger kind of like kilometer-long spacecraft that William Tompkins was talking about.
That is fascinating. Now, someone in the chat said that the military doesn't patent technology like this, and I'm here to tell you that last year, I covered it as soon as it came out, the U.S. Navy released patents on anti-gravity propulsion craft, and for those of you who might doubt this, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link. Here's the sauce. You guys can do your own research, as I said at the beginning of the show. Go ahead and check that out. And you can see for yourself. I mean, those patents are real. The article came out on Thursday, April 18th of 2019. I've also got a show that I did on this. I will go ahead and drop the link in the chat so you guys can watch that afterwards. But this is exactly why I wanted to do a show on this, because this technology that they released in these patents is just clearly so far advanced. And to your point, Dr. Salla, that this is 30 years old at least, I mean, this is how they do it. They don't release the technology that they use for the public's use until at least 30 years on down the line. Now, I have, first, let me say thank you to Rebecca for the PayPal donation. Also, Tease Against Tyranny wants me to ask, what was the mysterious launch off the coast of Los Angeles on, is it 11/9 or 9/11/2010, that was in the news for one day? I thought China with the new stealth sub. Now I'm not so sure. Clowns in America sub that did the Hawaii launch, perhaps? I've seen more than one sub launch from Cape Canaveral, Florida, and that was an ICBM from a sub. Can't wait for the answer. You're awesome. Well, you're awesome too. Thank you. Are you aware of that that launch that took place? I seem to remember it. There was a mystery launch that took place off of the coast of LA. I seem to remember thinking at the time that perhaps it was a Chinese sub that had accidentally launched a missile or something like that. But are you familiar with that story?
Yes, I am familiar with that. I remember at the time, the information that I got was that it was a Chinese sub that was able to basically penetrate into American territorial waters, or its exclusive economic zone at the very least, and launch a ballistic missile away from the United States, just to show the United States that, one, their submarines are more advanced than the Americans believed, and two, that they had ballistic missiles that they could launch at the United States at any time to kind of fulfill whatever agenda the Chinese had. So that was the information I had at the time. It kind of makes sense that if someone's going to launch a ballistic missile, off the coast of the United States, away from the United States, I mean, they're trying to send a message. And the Soviets have long had that kind of technology, and so there wouldn't be any great kind of benefit for them to show that off to the United States. But for China, it kind of makes sense that they probably felt that they didn't want to be kind of pushed around on the international arena, and they were just sending us a message saying that this is the kind of technology that we have, and it kind of like also reflects that the China having achieved a certain degree of self-confidence, that it has enough secret technology that it has built quietly, that it could stand up. Yeah. Well, what it is it's the beginning of the disclosure process of America's space program. First of all, Space Force is right now it's part of the Department of the Air Force. So the Air Force Secretary and the Air Force as an institution has a kind of outsized influence over Space Force. And so what the Air Force has secretly developed over since the 1940s and 50s, their squadrons of anti-gravity craft.
Dr. Salla, I'm sorry, hold on. Everybody is telling me that we're muted, but the sound is on. Can you guys hear me right now? The mute button is not pushed. I just need confirmation in the chat. I'm not muted. That's the thing. Let me mute and unmute. Hey, can you guys hear me? You can hear me now. Okay. All right. Dr. Salla, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I wasn't muted there, so I don't know why that happened. I'm sorry. Please continue with the modern secret space program. See, it's a part of the Air Force, and I'd like to know if keep going.
Sure. Okay. So Space Force basically right now, what it is that it is what was formerly Air Force Space Command, which was one of their subordinate commands, has been renamed Space Force. So you have 16,000 personnel that were formerly part of the Air Force Space Command that are now temporarily reassigned to Space Force. Now, Air Force Space Command was basically the cover for the Air Force secret space program. I mean, people are aware that the Air Force, ran spy satellites and were doing all sorts of things in space using conventional rockets launched out of Vandenberg Air Force Base, the X-37 and all of that. But the Air Force also had a secret space program, with different squadrons, a number of squadrons of flying triangles, flying saucer craft, and flying rectangle-shaped craft. And that these were all part of the Air Force. Now, with the creation of Space Force and basically the reassignment of Air Force Space Command to Space Force, it means that Space Force is going to inherit all of this secret anti-gravity, electromagnetically propelled spacecraft that have been secretly developed by the Air Force over a period of decades. As far as I can tell, it was in the 1970s that the Air Force first began deploying flying saucer craft and flying triangle craft. But now what's going to happen is that Space Force is going to inherit all of these technologies and then release them to the public and kind of spin it and say, well, look, and Trump will be very good at this. He'll say, look at what we've just developed. My administration has helped Space Force develop this incredible new technology and make it look as though all this is new stuff that's just been developed for Space Force. So that's the plan. And it's the kind of first step in the plan. So you'll have Space Force inheriting and then disclosing all of this secret stuff, flying triangles, flying saucers and so forth. And the reason they're doing that is one simple reason. Well, there's multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is that these craft are very expensive to build. And if you try to use black budget funding for building these craft, you might be at best only able to build, one squadron every few years or something. Now, at the same time, China is building multiple squadrons because they have the same technology through their espionage program. They're building multiple squadrons of these different configured anti-gravity propulsion craft. And so if this isn't made something that is presented to the American public as an important national security priority, eventually China is going to eclipse everything that the Air Force has out there. Because according to my understanding of the kind of like division of labor between the Air Force space program and the Navy space program, is that the Air Force space program, which is now being taken over by Space Force, has the focus on the Earth-Moon environment. So all kind of like the environment around the Earth and the Moon is what the Air Force is responsible for, or Space Force now. But the Navy is responsible for deep space operations, which is the why you have the name of their program is Solar Warden. That they are looking after the entire solar system and beyond. So the Navy battle groups or space carrier groups operate in deep space. So they don't really have any kind of jurisdiction over the Earth itself. So if you have China building fleets or multiple squadrons of anti-gravity propelled flying triangles, flying saucers, and rectangles, stolen, basically reverse engineered from stolen blueprints from the Air Force, which the deep state has handed over to China. This has been a process that the deep state has been handing over these technology jewels to China for several decades now, because they want China to reach the point where it can militarily defeat the United States in a space war. Mm-hmm. And that's really what they've been trying to do. And so this, I think, is why Space Force is being kind of championed by Trump and being rolled out, because the national security people understand that if things continue in the old way, where all of this is done covertly using black budget funding, eventually the Chinese will overtake what the Air Force, or now Space Force, has deployed in near Earth operations, and that China will eventually reach the technological point where it could successfully launch a space Pearl Harbor. And that's when China will basically control the entire planet, because all the Air Force and US satellite system could be shot down overnight. China has the capacity to do that today, but they wouldn't, because they know that they would face massive retaliation by the Air Force's secret space program. But if China's secret space program becomes bigger and more powerful than the Air Force or secret space program, then China could launch a space Pearl Harbor and not really be too concerned about what the retaliation would be.
Right. It looks like several people are asking me to ask you about the Thunderbolts project, the electric universe theory. I'm sure, I believe that's what they're talking about. Do you, and just so everybody knows, I'd like to do an entire show on the electric universe theory, and, I would love to have Walt Thornhill and, some of these other guys on here, Don Scott. But are you familiar with the electric universe theory, and can you tell us if that plays into these technologies that power these crafts at all?
Yes. The electric universe model is very important because basically it gives us a means of understanding how there are these electrical connections between all the suns in our galaxy. And, there are these kind of like incredibly long electrical currents, filaments, plasma filaments, and so forth that are flowing in terms of solar wind or the galactic wind, that are flowing throughout the entire galaxy. Now, this is very important in terms of understanding the kind of propulsion systems, the electromagnetic propulsion systems, and the space-time capabilities of a lot of craft. Because as you map out how these electrical lines flow throughout our galaxy, you are able to access what is essentially like a superhighway. So if you want to fly from, say, from Earth or from our solar system to, say, a distant solar system, let's say something like the Aldebaran solar system. Okay, now you could take an incredibly long time, flying in a direct line, or if you understood how the electrical fields work through the galaxy, you can actually manipulate that to get there much more quickly. and in manipulating space-time in that process. So, it's kind of like the difference between traveling on, say, I-95 from New York to Washington, D.C., as opposed to taking back roads. Obviously it would take so much longer taking the back roads to get from Washington to New York. So I think the electric universe model is an important one, helping us understand how electromagnetism and torsion field physics, that's the kind of unified field theory. When you can integrate spin and gravity and electricity, then you come up with a unified theory, and that's how extraterrestrials are able to travel throughout the galaxy using things like these incredibly big electrical plasma filaments that flow throughout our galaxy.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, I saw somebody else asking for an explanation of what happened to the Navy space program, and if I'm not mistaken, that's what you said is now known as Solar Warden, and the Navy's space program is not a part of Space Force?
That's correct. Basically, the Navy's space program is something that it's been decided by those that are kind of like handling the disclosure process that the Navy program is not going to be revealed, I guess, for a decade or something. And I think it's because they want to first kind of roll out what the Air Force has done, because it's much more digestible, because they can do it without revealing anything about extraterrestrial life, and just kind of pass it off as though these are technologies that the Air Force or Space Force has developed very, very quickly. These are all human-engineered technologies that people who talk about extraterrestrial life, the conspiracy theorists and so forth, so that they can kind of like delay any announcement about extraterrestrial life for a certain period of time. So that's one rationale for doing it. The other is if you white world the Navy secret space program, that will allow the Chinese and the deep state to basically to basically steal those plans, steal the blueprints for the carrier groups. Now, William Tompkins told me, told a few of us that were interviewing him. He basically said that the Navy Solar Warden program was deployed in the late 70s and early 80s, and throughout the 80s, the Navy deployed 8 space battle groups. These are like battle groups, kind of like how you have an aircraft carrier battle group. So it just comprises an aircraft carrier, destroyers, kind of supply ships, escort ships, a submarine, and so forth. So you also have these space carrier battle groups, because that's how the Navy operates. It's like they have a kind of like an overall integrated systems approach to projecting military power over long distances. So the Navy built 8 of these space battle groups, and that they were built initially at places like that they were deployed out of Utah, out of the Dugway Proving Grounds. That there's very large underground facilities there, and that's where they deployed these kilometre-long space carriers that the Navy has had built for it by different contractors. But they were all built and deployed in the 80s. But now they're very old. And the Navy basically has a 50-year cycle for aircraft carriers. And similarly, they have a 50-year cycle for these space carriers. So the space carriers that were built in the 80s are scheduled to be replaced in the 2030s. But rather than these new space battle groups or carriers being built out of Utah in the kind of secret underground facilities there with US corporations, the Navy is actually working with Nordic extraterrestrials in having these craft built at the naval shipyards in different worlds that are part of a galactic confederation. So kind of like mind-blowing stuff.
It's a huge idea, yeah.
but it kind of makes sense in terms of like security,
Sure.
because now, if anything that the Navy has secretly built for it, espionage capabilities and hacking capabilities have gotten so proficient and so advanced that anything that the Navy tried to do on Earth would be immediately stolen by the Chinese and by the deep state.
Mm.
So that's why the Navy has contracted out to these different extraterrestrial worlds to have their future carriers built. So I think this is also part of the reason why disclosure of the Navy space program is going to be delayed a little while, and it will only be when Space Force ceases to be a military service under the Department of the Air Force, which is the current arrangement, and when it becomes its own separate department, that you'll actually see the Navy coming in and being a big part of Space Force. Because there's no way in the world that the Navy would hand over control of its space carriers to the Air Force. It'll never happen.
Got to be protective of it. Let's see. It looks like somebody is asking for an introduction to you, Dr. Salla. My guest tonight is Dr. Michael Salla. He's an author and researcher, and tonight we're talking about the idea of the secret space program. We're going to be doing the call-in portion in a moment. I see that Aaron is already on the line, so we'll bring in Aaron in just a moment. But I wanted to ask, when we talk about the secret space program, are we talking about the United States government sanctioned secret, I guess, space program? Or does this also encompass the idea of a breakaway civilization and, secret craft that are out there maybe in private hands?
Okay, that's a really, it's very complex because you have the Air Force and you have the Navy developing their own secret space programs. Then there's a transnational space program. And that transnational space program involves the major aerospace companies on the planet secretly building very advanced spacecraft for the highest bidder out of places like Antarctica. And basically what happened was that in the 1950s, when the Germans in Antarctica had reached an agreement with the Eisenhower administration, you had a lot of American corporations and German corporations beginning to cooperate in basically building the fleets of spacecraft that the Germans needed for their space colonization program. And that towards the latter part of the 1950s and the 1960s, essentially the Germans handed Antarctica off to this transnational consortium, and that the German space program relocated to Mars, which is kind of like, I guess for a lot of people that's going to be, pretty shocking. But
it's a mind blower.
That's essentially what happened, and so the German space, the German breakaway civilization out of Antarctica relocated to Mars in the 1960s, and its old facilities in Antarctica were handed off to this transnational network. And so we're talking about major German multinational companies working with US multinational companies in building these tremendous spacecraft that they would then sell to the Germans on Mars, and also use for their own transnational space program. And so this is kind of like a separate space program altogether to what the Germans had developed, to what the Navy and what the Air Force had developed. And so now with this transnational corporate space program, you have a fourth major space program, which is located out of Antarctica, which, as far as I understand, is very powerful. And you can kind of see that in terms of different accounts we have from whistleblowers. or from insiders. Probably the best example, some people that want proof of this, is if you look at the case of Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson, who was the Deputy Director of the Defence Intelligence Agency and the Deputy Director of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for Intelligence, when in 1997 he learned about one of these corporate-run programs that was trying to reverse engineer a captured extraterrestrial spacecraft. He knew nothing about it. And so he wanted to know about it, and he was told point blank, no, you don't have authorization for this. And he wanted to know, well, how can you get authorization? And they said, well, you got to go to the Special Access Program Oversight Committee at the Pentagon. You got to ask them for permission. So he went to them and asked them for permission, and they denied him permission. They said, no, you don't have the right to find out what this corporation is doing in its reverse engineering program of a captured extraterrestrial spacecraft. So this was the Deputy Director of the Defence Intelligence Agency, and interestingly enough, Admiral Wilson went on to become the Director of the Defence Intelligence Agency several years after this incident. So there you actually have, and we actually have we have a scientist who leaked the transcript of a conversation he had with Admiral Wilson about this incident, which was initially reported by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell and by Dr. Stephen Greer. So you have multiple points of corroboration that this did happen, that there is a corporate-run secret space program, and that these senior Pentagon officials are denied access.
That's amazing. And just for anybody who wants to look into this, I am putting an article from Dr. Salla's website, which includes this transcript that he's referring to, and Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson's story. All right, well, Aaron is on the line. Aaron, it looks like you have also not been able to get a haircut. I am going on 4 or 5 months now, and I'm going crazy, man. It's summertime. It's a little hot. You're trying to get your microphone. Is it working?
I think so.
Yeah, it's a little choppy. It looks like you're roboting. You're roboting a little bit. Yeah, not working. Something is wrong with your internet connection tonight. Aaron, do you have 2 Wi-Fi networks? Like, do you have a 5G and a 2.5G? If you have one Wi-Fi connection with larger bandwidth, then you might want to switch to that.
I think fixed.
Yeah, it is still really bad.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, not working.
Bye.
Aaron, I'm gonna let you try to get it fixed. I'll put you back in the room, and then we'll try again here in a little bit. Maybe do some cleanup on your computer. Reset your router. That might work. So we'll come back to you in a second, Aaron. All right, there we go. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Let me see. We have one more caller. All right, caller, you're on the air. Can we get your name?
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. Make sure you mute the stream in the background. And then, what's your name?
My name's Tyler Rubel.
Tyler, welcome to the program. What's your question or comment for Dr. Salla?
Well, I was just curious. I watched Dr. Salla's recent video on YouTube, and I was just curious what he actually thinks about the event that might come with the deep state regarding the kind of a fake invasion. That was just the biggest question I had.
All right. And, this is obviously something we've heard about quite a bit. I believe it was a quote directly from Werner von Braun to his assistant, kind of laying out the various crises that were going to erupt on Earth, and that a faked alien invasion was going to be the last one. What do you know about that, Dr. Salla?
Right. Well, yeah, that was a sequence of false flag events that Werner von Braun described back in the mid-1970s. And of course, at the end of that series, he discussed asteroids and he discussed a false flag event. Well, what we're witnessing now with the kind of US politics and this kind of like showdown between the Trump administration and the deep state is that the deep state is burning through its cards. I mean, that's the only way to describe it. That they are just kind of like throwing one crisis or one kind of manufactured crisis after another at the Trump administration to try and get him to kind of like implode or make a major mistake so that he can be removed from power. And so, they're going through playing all these cards. And recently, I mean, the asteroid card is being increasingly played. There's more and more. Even today, there's an asteroid, the killer asteroid, that is supposed to pass just by the Earth, just missing the Earth. I don't have the details how close it's getting, but this month of June, there are 3 killer asteroids that if they impacted the Earth, they would cause tremendous devastation. Mm-hmm. And so you have more and more reports of these killer asteroids coming. And so the question is, well, could one of these killer asteroids be redirected by this kind of transnational corporation, just nudged a little bit so that it impacts the Earth? Now, if it does, then I think we would probably have the scenario kind of like that would be, that I think was kind of forewarned. James Comey, a couple of weeks ago, he put out a tweet of him with a 2,000-piece puzzle of Noah's Ark. And people thought that this was code, that basically he was telling the deep state assets to get ready. They're going to go ahead with the Noah, something that would create a Noah's Ark. So to me, that might be like an asteroid impact. So, that is probably what the deep state might utilize in the immediate months ahead. Now, after that, you might have a false flag, because you might have an overlapping of these. So you might have an alien invasion kind of like coming in after the asteroid impact, because whatever impact happens, if you have an asteroid hitting, say, the middle of the Pacific or the middle of the Atlantic, it's going to cause a lot of damage, but the world will recover. But then if in that recovery, then you have a false flag alien invasion, that would be something that the deep state could kind of like use to justify, moving forward with its plan, whatever it is, to kind of like take down the Trump administration, implement a new world order, doing both of those simultaneously. So I think between now and November 3rd, the next election, I think these cards that Werner von Braun talked about in the 70s, I think they're going to be played. Or there's a very good chance that the deep state will play these cards, because if they don't, Trump's going to win on a landslide. The whole CV issue is going to be exposed as a scam. You know what I mean? Yeah. And of course we have at the moment these racial issues being really kind of pushed onto the American political agenda. So all of this is going to be exposed. The truth is going to come out, and so it's only these major cards like an asteroid impact, like a false flag alien invasion. Those are the only cards I think that the deep state can play to kind of prevent this, or maybe thwart it to some degree.
All right, Tyler, thanks for your call, buddy. Appreciate you calling in. So if they were to do some type of a fake alien invasion, do you think that they would simply just take some of these advanced craft and pretend that they were from another world? Or if extraterrestrials are real, would they be actually doing it in conjunction with them?
Well, this is where you get the idea of an asteroid impact being a prelude to an invasion, because then imagine you having an asteroid impact. Bang! Millions of people died because of tsunamis and crashes and so forth. Kind of catastrophe in that region of the world that's impacted. Maybe there's multiple asteroid impacts. And so just a few weeks later or a month later, then you have holographic displays of extraterrestrial craft that are up there. Maybe these are holographic projections by the deep state's transnational corporate clients or assets that are projecting these craft, or maybe they use some real craft. But they could use those and make it out that, oh my God, these are the ones that launched the asteroid attack on Earth. We're at war, and it's like, wow, before you know it, we are kind of sucked into a major confrontation with this kind of like false flag aliens who supposedly will be blamed for the asteroid impact on the Earth. I think that's kind of like the way that it would make most sense to people. If you actually had some catastrophe like asteroid impacts that could then be blamed on extraterrestrials who suddenly show up, weeks or a month later, it would be like the artillery bombardment that is the prelude to a major invasion.
Well,
in conventional war, that's what happens.
The James Comey tweet is extremely interesting. I actually did not know that he had done that particular puzzle, but it's especially fascinating in light of the fact that we are in recent posts from our favorite Anon on the board, they've kind of hinted at the possibility of maybe a nuclear event taking place. The idea that, and this is, my theory from it, but the idea that perhaps while the deep state is fomenting all of this dissent and revolution in the United States, that they could use that as an opportunity to detonate some type of nuclear device or, some type of dirty bomb. And we're also seeing a level of mutiny among Trump's own Department of Defense. Mark Esper just recently directed all of the National Guard that are deployed in Washington, D.C. to disarm and to wear soft hats, not their helmets. How are they going to keep the people safe? Muriel Bowser calling for the fence to be taken down from around the White House. Clearly, they're trying to do anything they can to depose President Trump. If the fence comes down from around the White House, it's going to be swarmed with just throngs of these people that want nothing more than to drag him out and string him up. But they could maybe avoid all of that if they just, drop an asteroid on us or, drop a nuke, one of these things. I'm going to take a look for that tweet from James Comey. That is fascinating. Here, let's go ahead and see if Aaron has gotten his line ready yet. Aaron, are you there? Have you been able to get your internet connection sorted out?
No. I'm waiting.
Yeah, it is so not working. Why don't you try calling in from your phone?
Oh.
Yeah, try calling in from your phone. All right, we'll talk to you soon, Aaron. Thanks for trying. Not working. Okay, next caller. Can we get your name, please? Caller, you're on the line. 5016. Caller, are you there? Okay. We're going to go to the next caller. And if you guys are not ready, then I'm just going to jump on to the next person.
Hello?
Caller, you're
Hello,
on the air.
Aaron.
Can I get your name? This is Aaron?
Yes, it's Aaron.
Excellent, Aaron. Glad to have you here. What's your question or comment for Dr. Salla?
Oh, thank you for taking my call. Yeah, sorry about the problems.
No problem.
Nice to see you, Dr. Salla. I'm a big fan of yours. And for the people in the chat that don't quite understand this, remember, it only took 66 years to go from the Wright brothers' first flight to landing on the moon. 66 years. It's been 51 years since then. So that gives you an idea of what could have been developed. But also, in addition to Solar Warden, I understood from Randy Kramer's testimony that also Radiant Guardian, so together Solar Warden and Radiant Guardian sort of patrol the solar system. And I noticed you haven't mentioned anything about Corey Goode. He says we're trading with 900 different races of aliens. Could you comment on that?
Sure. Well, Corey Goode, he has had his direct experience as part of a 20 and back program that was with the Solar Warden program. And also more recently, he says that he was part of this Sphere Being Alliance, or he was conscripted to kind of like be an intermediary between humanity and this new group of extraterrestrials that have come into our solar system to kind of mediate between the different factions. So he's got a very interesting background, and part of the things that he says that he has directly experienced is being on Mars, interacting with the breakaway colony that's been established there, and that they are now so advanced in terms of the technologies that they have built, that they trade with up to 900 different extraterrestrial civilizations, which is incredible. And on its own, people might be skeptical, but there are other whistleblowers who have come forward independently talking about kind of similar trading arrangements between secret space programs and extraterrestrials. There were two whistleblowers that Linda Moulton Howe found, Spartan 1 and Spartan 2, and she says that they are aware of and were involved in a secret space program that is launched out of Antarctica. It's an international secret space program. So this is one that is separate to the transnational program that's down there. So you have another program down in Antarctica, and that they have an office for interstellar trade at the NSA headquarters at Fort Meade. And they describe multiple different extraterrestrial civilizations that were trading with this secret space program. So there are different people, different sources describing a very similar thing happening. That ultimately, what we have on planet Earth is not just one or two or three, but we have at least 5 major secret space programs with incredibly advanced technologies that have been developed in these either breakaway civilizations or in these very highly classified programs that has all been done without the general public knowing. And of course, we still kind of live with jet-propelled aircraft and kind of like gas-powered motor vehicles, which is kind of like technology which is 100 years old. Whereas in the secret space program, they don't use any of that. All of their advanced propulsion systems use electromagnetics, torsion field physics, and other exotic propulsion systems like that.
Aaron, one of the most difficult things for me to swallow about the whistleblowers that come forward is that it's basically on the honor system. I mean, you just have to suspend disbelief and trust people. So, Dr. Salla, my question to you is there anyone that has supposedly come out of the secret space program in modern times that has produced any type of evidence that they were involved in something like that? Or is it all just, people with stories to tell?
Well, William Tompkins, he's someone that has actually produced a lot of documentation verifying what he did. He did provide some designs that he actually created at Douglas Aircraft Company. I actually, in my own research, did some FOIA requests.
There we go.
To find out. I did FOIA requests to find out if I could verify anything about his story, and I was able to verify that the admiral that Tompkins said was running this espionage program out of Naval Air Station San Diego. Tompkins says that this admiral loaned him an aircraft where he could pilot that aircraft to like China Lake or to any kind of nearby scientific facility where he could deliver these briefing packets. So that was his story. What I found in the documentation, in the FOIA documents, I found corroboration for one of the documents that Bill Tompkins had, which was an exit pass for Naval Air Station San Diego that was signed by this admiral. And now at the time, Bill Tompkins was a second-class petty officer, machinist class. But this slip actually says that he had permission to take packets out of Naval Air Station San Diego and also had permission to access an aircraft, and that it was signed by this Admiral Bolter. So the signature actually verified Tompkins' story. So there you have kind of like one of the rare cases where there is actually hard evidence substantiating what Tompkins' story was all about. And there are other things that I found that substantiate Tompkins, and there are others who also have had aspects of their testimony verified.
Okay. All right. That's amazing. Aaron, thank you very much for a call, man. Did you have anything else further for Dr. Salla?
One more thing. Do you know anything about Ronald Reagan when he was doing his Star Wars defense program? It's rumored that he also invited all countries to be involved in our secret space program covertly, a small portion of their population, but and also that they're also trading in these secret space programs with humans. So that's another reason why they keep it quiet.
Well, that's actually a very important point there, Aaron. Ronald Reagan received a briefing soon after he became president in January of 1983. And in this briefing, he was told about a hostile extraterrestrial threat to the planet. So Reagan was given a partial briefing, and based on that briefing, he made it a mission throughout his presidency to get major nations to cooperate for dealing with an extraterrestrial threat. And that's something that it has been substantiated because it's well known that Ronald Reagan firstly appealed to the Secretary General of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to cooperate with the United States in meeting an extraterrestrial threat. And in, September of 1987, Ronald Reagan actually got in front of the United Nations General Assembly talking about the need for international cooperation to deal with an extraterrestrial threat. Now, according to different whistleblowers, what happened was that after the end of the Cold War, that's exactly what happened, that the major nations did reach an agreement and set up a secret space program. So this is an international secret space program that multiple people have talked about. You know, Corey Goods talked about it. Spartan 1 and Spartan 2 have talked about it. And there is kind of a lot of documentation that you can find to support that this actually was created, that there was an international secret space program that was set up, and that this was something that owes its origin to Ronald Reagan and his belief that humanity had to combine, had to unify to deal with an extraterrestrial threat. And I think this is part of how the deep state manipulates politicians. They give them a little bit of the story, but knowing the character and the psychology of the target of that information, they're able to predict how the target is going to respond. So they knew very well that by giving this limited briefing to Reagan, that he would become a major force in trying to get international cooperation to work together to build this international secret space program. And interestingly, there's another whistleblower, Boyd Bushman, who also talked about this. He says that there were Chinese scientists working at Area 51 as well as Russian scientists working at Area 51. And that really disturbed him and a lot of other American scientists. Again, that's more evidence that there was this international secret space program basically collaborating in reverse engineering extraterrestrial technologies.
Fascinating. Aaron, thanks for your call, buddy. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
We'll talk to you soon. All right. And now, W. Rain in the chat said, how would they keep this secret all these years? Well, there's a couple of different things I think that really make sure that it happens. Obviously, the military is very compartmentalized. There will oftentimes be groups of people working on specific projects, and then they won't know what other people, even in the same branch of the military, is doing. And then secondly, people do sign a security agreement where they're not allowed to talk about things. And if the information does get out, I would say that they probably have a means of identifying who released the information. And then there are other shadier elements of the government who can make sure that people just disappear or who have an accident. I can think of a number of different instances where people in the government, just decided to take a leap off a building, or they ended up on the wrong end of a rope, or their car crashed. I mean, it happens, all too often. We can look at a certain politician's body count, and everybody can agree that many people end up, basically not here anymore as a result of having too much information. So even if it is amazing and awesome to have the knowledge of a secret space program, I think that for many people, it is a greater incentive to know that they're going to keep breathing if they don't say anything about it. But let's go ahead and bring in the next caller. Oh, I do need to say thank you to Son of a Green Card and also to Chris P. And you guys, I also did just want to say, for anybody who does want to support me on the channel, I'm going to put this link for the Cash App in here. If you sign up for the Cash App and send a donation, you get $5 in your Cash App account. And then I also will get a free $5 for you signing up through that. Also, there are no fees through Cash App. Unlike PayPal, if you don't select friends and family, there are fees that are taken out. So just something to consider, and I appreciate anybody who is supporting the show and the channel. We've got Guaranteed Success on the line right now. Now, Dr. Salla, how many whistleblowers approximately have come out to say that they have been a part of a secret space program, no matter who was running it? Do you have any idea?
Well, we're talking about people who maybe have had exposure to aspects of a secret space program. For example, I can think of one person, Edgar Fouché, who worked at Area 51. He came out saying that he knew of flying triangles being deployed out of the S4 facility at Area 51 in the late 1980s. But even though he didn't directly see it or work on that program, he says that he interacted with and learned about the program from people who did. So he, in a sense, is like a second-hand source for that. But he knows of that. Of course, more recently, we have people such as Bill Tompkins saying that they worked on a secret space program, designing it. We've had Corey Good, Emery Smith, Randy Kramer was mentioned. We've had many dozens of people who say that they have been participants in a secret space program.
Okay.
But depending on how you define, what aspect of that secret space program, we're talking, dozens to hundreds.
Okay. All right. Of course, Bob Lazar, also, that name comes to mind immediately when you mention S4. Looks like Guaranteed Success is having some issues with the audio, so we're going to go with 4040. Caller, you are on the air. Can we get your name for the audience?
Yeah, hi, my name is Dominic.
Hi, Dominic. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. Thanks for calling in. What's your question for Dr. Salla?
Yeah, Dr. Salla, I'm going to move away from my TV here. Sorry, I didn't realize there's a little delay. Yeah, so Dr. Salla, I'm a major fan. I've been listening to a lot of things that you've been doing, and really enjoy it. And I wanted to thank you for all the work that you've done. Appreciate everything you've been doing.
Thank you, Dominic.
And Yeah, yeah, there you go. I took care of that. Yeah, so Dr. Salla, I'm wondering if you could, maybe give some insight on the possibility that people from the earth, from the surface population get some sort of access to at least a basic anti-gravity for travel, because like the way that things are going right now with the airline industry and the fact that things are getting restrictive and there's a lot of it's tough to fly and it takes a long time and we're using this antiquated technology. What are the chances and when do you see us actually getting some form of even a basic transportation using electrogravitic type technology? Do you see it like in the next 3 to 5 years, next 5 to 10 years? I'm just kind of curious about when we can maybe see something like that.
Right. One of the things that I heard, and I think this is probably true, is that one of the first things that Donald Trump did when he actually entered the White House was that he issued an executive memorandum to the intelligence community to ask them to immediately lift their secrecy orders against over 1,000 patents that deal with new energy and health. Currently, there's about 5,800 patents, patent applications that have been basically put into limbo because of national security orders by the intelligence community. And these span the spectrum of kind of like alternative energy, alternative healing modalities, and so forth. So there's 5,800 of these patent applications that could change life on the planet, but they've all been stopped from coming into the public arena. Now, Trump has asked for the security orders to be lifted so that these patents can then be granted and then released to the general public. And I think this is part of the reason why you have the Navy approving one of its scientists, Salvador Payas, to release these 5 advanced patents dealing with electromagnetic propulsion and so forth, to kind of like start that process forward. Because that's how we're going to have the transformation, is that these patents that could transform life overnight are just being held in limbo because the applications are not granted. The inventors are not able to talk about the patents. They're not able to kind of have them produced and released into the public arena simply because they're deemed to be a national security threat if they're released. So I think this is something that once this election is determined, and I think as Space Force comes out and starts to release its electromagnetic propulsion systems, I think the groundwork will be laid for a lot of these patent applications to be released, to be granted, and then you'll actually have this kind of like renaissance, it'll be an industrial revolution or something that is incredible, because one thing about this kind of like the virus and the closing down of American businesses and industry and so forth is that there's been a massive contraction of the economy, and the airline industry in particular has suffered greatly. But with the release of these patents, you're going to have an incredible expansion. And so that kind of makes sense that, before we experience that expansion, we have to have like a contraction where people's minds are kind of like opened up somehow so that they're ready for the incredible technologies that are about to come our way.
Any other questions for Dr. Salla, or you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, Dr. Salla, what are your thoughts on the possibility that there's battles going on in deep underground military bases right now? Perhaps, like we've heard over the last couple of months that there's been explosions in places, near Area 51 and, in New York and several other places in the U.S. Do you think that there's battles being fought, against like possibly even like reptilian groups or like, cabal bases?
Yes, I think there has been a lot of battles that have been fought. I mean, a lot of these earthquakes that we hear being occurring in places where, like recently there was one near China Lake. There have been some in places around the country where we know there are secret facilities, deep underground bases, and there are a number of people, whistleblowers, contactees, talking about some of these deep underground military bases with different extraterrestrial groups being destroyed. So I think that's probably substantially accurate, that what we're witnessing on the surface is clearly a kind of a civil war happening between the deep state and the Trump administration and his allies within the military intelligence community and white hats within the different bureaucracies. There is a kind of like a civil war occurring, but it's happening below the radar. But in terms of these secret facilities, I think there probably are violent battles being fought, and the different military operations, like, for example, very recently, you had the Defender Europe exercises, where there are thousands of military personnel sent over to Europe. I think part of the rationale for those exercises was to kind of like take out some of these deep state compounds and underground facilities there in Europe. So basically I think a lot of the fighting is happening, but it's behind the scenes and in these underground facilities.
All right. Thank you so much for your call. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Salla. I really appreciate everything you do, and we're definitely loving what you're doing here in the United States. Thank you so much.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Now, Dr. Salla, some people in the chat wanted me to ask you if you had any information about the Black Knight satellite. This is, it's supposedly an ancient satellite that orbits the Earth. It was up there before we had the technology to put satellites into orbit. It's been photographed. I believe it was in the pages of Time or Life magazine many years ago. Do you have any information about it, or perhaps where it began and how it got here?
Well, the kind of like the satellites that people see up there, I mean, some of them are very old. I mean, you can go back to the 1950s. There was a UFO researcher, a Major Donald Kehoe, who was giving reports about these mysterious kind of like satellites that were up there in space. So this was in the early 1950s, before Sputnik. Mm-hmm. So, they were reporting these satellites. So I think what they were seeing were these extraterrestrial craft. Now, some people talk about the Black Knight being some kind of ancient craft belonging to the Atlantean civilization. I don't know about that. I think it's probably can be explained as something belonging to one of the different groups that are either visiting the Earth, an extraterrestrial group, or one of the inner Earth civilizations as well, because we talk about ancient Atlantis and Lemuria. I mean, there's a lot of stories about them evacuating the surface of the planet during catastrophic Earth changes or pole shifts, going into deep underground caverns and establishing a civilization down there, but still having advanced aerospace technologies, and so developing satellites and so forth. That was something that they would continue to have up there. So definitely, there are many things up in Earth orbit that have different extraterrestrial or ancient civilization origins, and even more recent, kind of like secret space program origins.
All right. And I just want to say, it looks like Guaranteed Success got disconnected. So if you can get back in there, Guaranteed Success, I was going to take your call next. So I'm just going to take the next caller. And guys, if I admit you into the call and your microphone's not working, I'm going to put you back in the waiting room so that we can get that just to the next caller, so we can keep the show rolling. It's nothing personal, anyone. But Guaranteed Success, please jump back on the call. Caller, you're on the air. Can we get your name?
Yeah, Brian.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Good, but I'm disabled and I also am deaf in one ear, so I have problems when I call you sometimes about getting to the phone again. I want to hear what you're saying, but
can you mute the stream in the background?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I did.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Is that better? I'm terribly sorry. Yeah, but that's like the second time you've hung up on me in a millisecond, and then I have to go back in and get way back in line. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know how to even put my name in there and say, like, please give me a moment. I'm sorry.
Well, you know, I mean, like I said, it's nothing personal. If you come into the room, and the mic. Well, I have no idea who you are, so it's definitely nothing personal.
Right.
If your microphone isn't working and it's not connecting, I'm just trying to keep the show moving along. And my hope is that once your microphone connects, I'll go ahead and bring you in, like I just did. What's your question for Dr. Salla?
Dr. Salla, hello. I think everything you said has been very interesting, and I very much enjoy it. I have a question about you know, our new space program. Are we going to be going to the moon and having a base up there, and you know, for interstellar travel eventually? I guess that's it.
Well, there are already bases on the moon. There are many bases on the far side of the moon. Some are bases that belong to the secret space program. Some are extraterrestrial bases. And now, in addition, what you have is China, Russia, and the United States, and I believe India, all planning to send spacecraft to the moon and establish bases up there. So it will be very interesting to see how that unfolds, because the moon is very much an occupied body, and there are protocols up there. And the thing is, in a sense, the moon, as I understand it, is similar to Antarctica, that it's not a place for establishing military bases. It's not a place for establishing weapons programs. It's a place for diplomacy and scientific exploration. And so that I think is those are the kind of parameters for what the US can do, and what Russia and China can do, and India can do when they launch their respective missions to the moon. But I think Elon Musk is planning to get something up there by 2024. That seems to be a very ambitious schedule, but I mean, he's been doing some amazing stuff using his reusable rockets. So, I mean, he may be successful in doing that. But, you know, other than just establishing a footprint on the moon, I don't think anyone is going to be allowed to establish any kind of military presence on the moon until there's some sort of arrangement or diplomacy that's reached with those that are presently occupying the moon.
I see.
Right.
You're mute. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if that was a sufficient answer for you, if you had anything to follow up with.
Yeah, well, that was excellent. But yeah, I do have one quick little follow up. I don't want to take up a lot of time here, but so I heard you say something about, you know, they're kind of waiting until everybody has an open mind enough to be able to accept this kind of thing. I mean, I think a lot of us have open minds, and I'd like to know what in the world is going on with my tax dollars that are being used to do these kind of things. You know, when do you think they might tell us something?
Well, I think this is revealing the truth about these advanced electromagnetic propulsion systems, and the ability to be able to travel, you know, throughout the solar system using these technologies, and that rocket technologies are outdated and will just be replaced overnight. You know, that's a major paradigm shift. I mean, even though there are many now who are like fairly familiar with a lot of the whistleblowers and the insiders that are talking about, you know, UFOs and the cover-up, you know, the vast majority of the population for them, this is science fiction. This is conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat territory, and they won't have anything to do with it. So something needs to happen to open their minds. Your mind, the listeners, and everyone listening to this show, your mind is already open. You don't need anything done for you. But I think for a lot of others, for the vast majority of the planet, their mind needs to be opened, and something like what we're witnessing now. These are very much like the end times, where now we're having like this kind of like the plague and the famines, and next will be the meteorite or the asteroid impacts, and who knows, there could be false flag invasion. But that'll open people's minds, and then they'll be ready for this new world that'll emerge.
All right, caller. Yeah. Thank you so much for calling in. I appreciate it.
Thank you both. Have a good evening.
Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much. Okay, great. Now, let's see. My buddy Haterproof is on the line. Haterproof, I don't know which one of these you are. There are multiple people with no names. So we've got 9 minutes left, guys. I'm sorry. I don't think we're going to be able to get to everyone, but hopefully we can get to as many as possible. Caller, you're on the line. Can we get your name? Caller, they hung up. Okay. All right. So we're going to go with this caller then. Caller, can you please mute your stream in the background? Something tells me this is Haterproof. Haterproof, I'm going to unmute you. Please have it muted.
You got me.
Haterproof?
I'm on.
Yeah.
Hello.
Mute the stream in the background, buddy. It's
my bad. I got it.
Okay. All right, Haterproof?
I got it. Yep, I'm here.
Awesome.
How you doing?
Good stuff, man. How you feeling?
Pretty well. I'm healing, Red. Slowly but surely, and Shirley left the building with Laverne. Never mind. That was a joke. It was lame.
All right.
I'm half awake, my man, but I tuned in and I was watching Dr. Salas, and I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments to Dr. Salas. The whole quest of a lot of the things that I started to do research online, Dr. Salas, was because of being able to determine what it is exactly that I saw that defied conventional flight characteristics in the sky one night. And so that led me on a quest of about $16,872, which was settled for roughly around $300 to $400 on my phone bill. Anyway, and all roads lead back to DARPA. I don't know if you're familiar with Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA.mil. That's where everything basically gets back to. But here's what I had figured out, Doctor, apparently, that these accretion disks, apparently through some level of electromagnetic or EM sensor gauging, they figured out how to create a void in front of an accretion disk that it actually falls into itself. So much like a rock on the surface tension, like a rock backwards, I would say, in the vacuum of space skips, or how we would skip a rock on water here on Earth, the physics would be backwards up there or out there in the vacuum of space, apparently. Anyway, so what I figured out is that the jelly doesn't turn to strawberry when this thing cycles up, and that's why we're also seeing this mirage effect around the craft as well. And that's why when people can see the craft move across the sky and stop on a dime, it doesn't necessarily mean that the aircraft that they're manned as well. So they could be unmanned as well. But I guess my whole thing is why didn't the strawberry turn to jelly? And that's where I became on my quest to figure out what it is that could create those particular shielding dynamics around an accretion disk or around a craft. And that's where my phone calls led me. Anyway, Doctor, just to make a long story short on that, with these little bits that I'm leaving for you, that I'm sure you're picking up. Anyway, Y1, or what was it? Yttrium, deuterium, and yttrium. Yttrium, deuterium, and yttrium, I think, is what the composite was. And anyway, they spin this in a cryostat up to about 50,000 miles an hour, and that's where they were doing those shielding experiments where they were measuring the lowered center points of gravity above and below that. And to get an accurate reading, they needed to use a rad-hardened EM10 sensor because they couldn't get accurate shielding readings to
I don't know, in the development of the craft, apparently. Anyway, so I'll just leave it at that. And then one other thing I wanted to tell you is that I think that there are, and this is just conspiracy, because that's what we are, we're nuts. So I think, Red's laughing. So anyway, I think that I sound nuts right now because I just woke up, but I think that there are individuals that are amongst us in higher, upper levels of authority that have particular traits that at least I've seen on one occasion and that I've done my research on that is relevant to what in animals is called a nictating eye gland. And I was wondering if you were familiar with an inner eye layer that's a protective layer that you see in certain reptoids, sharks, dogs, birds, namely, or particular species of animals, including us. We have a remnant.
Hater-proof. Yeah. Let's leave it right there because we only got 5 minutes left, and I want to get at least one more caller. Man. It's okay, buddy. So take your answer off the air. We'll talk to you soon. Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Salla. Did that seem to line up with your understanding of what the propulsion system is and how it works? Because
it's very similar. What it brings to mind is what Edgar Fouché had to say about the TR3B, that the propulsion system is based on highly pressurized plasma, mercury-based plasma that spins around at a minimum of 60,000 revolutions per minute, and that generates the space-time anomalies for the propulsion of these TR3Bs. As for the kind of like the pupils, the split pupils, different genetics, reptilian genetics, I think that there are reptilians who basically have infiltrated and live amongst the human population and use various ways of being able to disguise their identity, mind control and technology. But occasionally, you can see the pupils change. That's one of the ways in which the technology or the mind control appears to fail.
Okay, all right. Caller, I'm about to unmute you. Hopefully you've got your stream muted in the background. Can we get your name?
Hi, this is Elizabeth out in Southern California.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Dr. Salla, I was wondering if you could briefly speak to what happened from a geopolitical standpoint, the split in the UFO community that took place last year, 2019, at the Contact of the Desert convention. I'm sure you'll understand what I'm talking about, and if you could speak on that to what you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Dr. Salla?
Right. Well, there's always been this debate over the role of whistleblowers in the UFO community. Should whistleblowers or insiders be believed? Because typically they come forward saying they worked in a classified program and that this is what they experienced, but they don't have any documentation to substantiate what they experienced. And there are those that say, well, we should only focus on empirical evidence and kind of like reliable documentation, and that we should ignore people who can't document their material. The problem, of course, with that is that anyone that has been exposed to a classified program, it's illegal for them to have any evidence of that program. So all you're going to have are their stories. And as a social scientist, what I try and do is look at things like, do they have are they reliable? Do they have good character? What's their motivation in doing this? Is there supporting documentation in terms of did they work at an Air Force facility where they probably did do dissections on extraterrestrial entities, as say someone like Emery Smith claims. So you look at those things, but that's a debate that goes back many decades, and it's not going to be resolved simply because some people want hard evidence documentation. Other people can look into a person's eye and hear them and say, yeah, this guy's telling the truth, I believe him, and nothing will shake that. So this debate is not going to go away, and I think we need to find the middle ground, and that's what I try and do.
All right, excellent. Brenda, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate you calling in. We're going to try for one more caller, guys. Actually, Dr. Salla, we've only got 3 people on the line. Do you mind just going a few minutes over so we can get these last 3?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. Caller, you're on the air. Can we get your name and can we have you ask your question? And I need you to mute the stream in the background.
No, it's muted, Brad. This is Terry Sale.
Terry,
I
hello.
want to say hello to all my Patriot family. I love y'all so much. And I just want to tell you, I was just typing in, I just saw a drop from George on Twitter, that the Florida National Guard was just sworn in as U.S. Marshals in D.C.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Yeah, I know everybody's jumping stumps about it, so I thought I'd tell you.
Well, I'll totally check it out. Was that the only reason you called in, or did you have a question for Dr. Salla? Because that's great info, but I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no. I'm just listening and sucking everything he has to say up. I love it.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you for listening, and thank you for calling.
No sweat.
All
Thank
right.
you. I love y'all. Good
Thank
night.
you so much. Bye-bye. God bless. Okay. Thank you so much. We've got caller. You're on the air. Can we get your name?
Hi, this is Melissa.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks for calling. What's your question for Dr. Salla?
Yes, I live in Florida on the East Coast and just a couple of miles south of Cape Canaveral. And we see rockets going off all the time, part of the Falcon 9 program, I believe it's called. And it's my understanding that each time one of those goes up, there are like 50 or 60 satellites on that for this universal Wi-Fi program. And I'm interested in what your take is on that and Dr. Salla's take.
Sure, yeah, I think that's what the Starlink program that Elon Musk is behind, and they want to deploy a 5G system up there with thousands of satellites transmitting the 5G signals. And of course, you're going to have a lot of local transmitters and receivers kind of like amplifying and relaying those signals all over. On the one hand, yeah, it's great for really fast internet connections, which is going to be really helpful for this kind of Internet of Things we're moving towards with 5G. But on the other hand, there's a lot of kind of like concerns over safety, because there are certain bands of the gigawatt spectrum that is detrimental to health. In particular, the 60 gigawatts, it basically changes oxygen. And so if we're being bombarded by 60 gigahertz transmission frequencies, then the oxygen supply in our bloodstream is basically poison, and we can get very, very sick. And also at 95 gigawatts, I mean, that's the spectrum that's used for the active denial system. So if you transmit at 95 gigahertz from the atmosphere, with sufficient energy, you could use that as a kind of giant active denial system, and basically, people will feel as though they're on fire and submit to whatever, but they would have to hide or submit to whatever's being demanded of them. So, yeah, there are a lot of concerns over what the ultimate goal is in deploying, whatever it is, 30,000, 50,000 microsatellites around the Earth as part of this 5G Internet of Things that Elon Musk wants to be a part of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your call, caller. I appreciate you taking the time to listen and call in. And we've got our last caller coming in right now. Caller, can we get your name?
Tim.
Tim, thank you for calling. What's your question for Dr. Salla?
I would like to know if he has any insight on time travel and if the Earth is flat.
There you go, Dr. Salla. What do you say?
Well, firstly, I don't think the Earth is flat. I think it's a sphere, just like the sun, just like the moon, and many stars that we can see. The first part of the question, what was that?
Time travel.
Time travel.
Yeah, any insight?
Time travel. Well, time travel is something that, when you look at the unified field theory, if you combine electromagnetism, gravity, what you're going to get is an ability to be able to manipulate space-time when you generate very powerful electromagnetic waves or generate very powerful gravitational fields. Space-time is going to be warped, and if you have the right technology, you can do it in a deliberate way so that you could either travel to distant locations, or you could look and see what's happening in different places at that time. So it's a vast field, but just in a nutshell, yeah, that's my take on time travel.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for your call, Tim. We appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful evening. Dr. Salla, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us once again. I Guaranteed Success, who did not get to ask you a question tonight, wanted some information about the Transnational organization that's running their own secret space program. If we were to go to your website, do you have any articles specifically on that organization? Or any books?
Yeah, I do talk about the interplanetary corporate conglomerate, but the most information they're going to get is going to my book, Antarctica's Hidden History. There I talk about the Transnational Corporation that was set up in Antarctica. So they can go there. And so yeah, on the website, I just also want to announce, I just put up there a new webinar series on China's secret space program that I'm going to launch on July 11th. So people that want to know more about China, over and above what's in the book, Rise of the Red Dragon, that's a good place to start.
All right, awesome. Well, I wanted to ask about that, and I didn't get a chance, so thank you for ending with that. So once again, sir, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Really appreciate you, Dr. Salla. Thank you so much to the mods, everybody in the audience. Need to say thank you to Kim, and thank you to Brenda for those super chats at the end. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful evening. Don't forget to join Methods and I tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern with Deanna Lorraine, former candidate for Congress. She was running against Nancy Pelosi, and hopefully we'll get her running against Nancy Pelosi in the near future as well. So thank you, everyone. Good luck, God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.